So we are now going to move to the panel discussion. And this is going to be really cool because we're going to hear from people who really bring it, together from the food perspective. So I'm going to invite Ed to come up, Ed Klein, to come up and introduce the panel that he'll be moderating. And I'm not sure if Ralph is going to be able to join or not. He isn't going to be able to. So, yeah. All right. Very good. So Ed leads the marketing effort for Vine to Bar and has had a long career in marketing and branding with Coca-Cola and others, and ran his own business, et cetera. And so it's a real pleasure to have Ed here to moderate this panel that's really going to bring things to our plate. So, Ed.
Thank you, Harold. I actually think we're going to need a couple more chairs up here. So why don't I do this? Why don't I'll introduce the panel one by one, and as I do, please come on up. And I'm going to start with Russ Anderson. Russ, since founding Anderson Advanced Ingredients, Russ and his team have been renowned for providing novel, efficacious, functional food solutions to the natural products industry, helping countless R&D projects move from concept to reality. Led by legacy products Cherry Pure, Moisture Lock, and Fiber Smart, the industry knows they can always count on Russ and his team for premium, unique raw materials that will move the marketing needle. Russ is a father of four and can be found coaching baseball or on the golf course when he's not making sure the supply chain is flowing smoothly for his clients. So Russ, come on up. And I'm going to ask Russ, grab a chair with you. Exactly. Next, I'm going to ask Valerie Benoit to join us. Valerie is the Senior R&D Project Manager for Specialty and Innovation at Barry Callebaut. Valerie's been working at Barry Callebaut for 20 years and has a bachelor's degree in biochemistry from the University of Montreal. And Valerie is also known to us, as Ralph already alluded to, pretty much the creator of Vine to Bar. So we're really excited to have Valerie here and looking forward to hearing what she has to say about the potential. We also have Aaron Judge with us, who we already had a wonderful introduction. So Aaron, grab a seat here. And last but not least, and a favorite of many in the world of food, is a chef. We're going to hear from Chef Gerard Viverito. Chef Gerard is a classically trained chef and culinary educator who is passionate about sustainable food practices. He's dedicated a large part of his career to functional cooking, often using just a few simple ingredient swaps to enhance a recipe's health benefits. His commitment to sustainable food practices extends to his role as corporate chef and culinary advisor to Blue Nalu, as well as being the director of his food-based catering company, Gerard's Catering. Through his company, he is very active with the community of local farmers. And early in his career, Chef Viverito spent many years as an executive chef here in California, the Virgin Islands, and 3 years in Spain, France, and Italy, and that is making all of our mouths water. And I'll ask Chef to come on up and grab a chair as you join us. While Chef Gerard's coming up, thank you again for the introduction, Harold, my background. I just wanted to also share a little bit of my experience as we get into this. As a lifelong marketer, as Harold alluded to, it's always important for me to understand the voice of the consumer. Ultimately, who's eating our products? What are we designing them for? We've talked about the great trifecta that we have. And, of course, when we're talking about the first commercialization here with Vine to Bar, indulgence is a big part of it. As Scott alluded to earlier, we were so pleasantly surprised about the taste. But it came out of the voice of the consumer. We were doing focus groups early on in the product development. We had people taste it. And I was sitting next to Ralph behind the curtain, as we all have seen. And one of the consumers actually said, "This is incredible. This is 65% dark chocolate," and the words literally came out of the consumer's mouth. That really tempers those bitter notes of what I'm used to with dark chocolate. Lo and behold, here we are. That language is on the packaging, and of course, it's the basis of the patent that we've talked about, which is that we have something so extraordinary that it actually makes a great food taste even better. So let me, on that note, start our conversation with Valerie, who actually helped create that product. Valerie, what surprised you the most when you started to work with the Chardonnay Marc?
Well, when we first started to work with the Chardonnay Marc, we know what we know, we don't know what we don't know, so it's very trial and error. We tried, how is it going to work on our equipment? Is it going to taste good? How is it going to affect the color, the texture, and all of that? So, we started the process by, let's just try 5% in the formulation. Let's just see what happens. And it worked really well. So we increased, 10%, 15%, 20%, and we just sort of played with the material. And my first surprise was how the texture was, how smooth it was, how creamy the texture was. And the reason I'm surprised by it is because one of the common defects in chocolate when you add fibers is that it can get sticky. You can find some grittiness also in it. So you have to be careful of how much fiber you're going to add in chocolate. And that wasn't the case at all. So, and everyone who tasted the chocolate, how smooth it is. That was my first surprise using the Chardonnay Marc. And I would say that my second surprise was how good it tasted. After 20 years in chocolate, I have tried hundreds of ingredients. They don't always taste good, and they don't always pair well with chocolate. That wasn't the case. It pairs really well. It's a great combination. So that was my second, surprise, is that how good it tasted. And my third surprise was, as we continued developing and the chocolate and trying different cocoa content, different fiber content, different sugar content in the chocolate, is we decided to go a little further in the development by adding the Acticoa cocoa powder, which is a berry calbo cocoa powder that is high in flavanol. And to be honest, I was skeptical. I thought, this is going to be too much. It's going to be too much, polyphenol. It's going to taste astringent. It's going to taste too bitter. I was afraid that it wouldn't taste great, and it was the opposite. Adding the Chardonnay Marc to the chocolate actually made it taste better. So that was, a huge surprise for me.
Was it a paradox?
Yes.
And were there any specific considerations that you went through to sort of optimize the formulation, in addition to the things that you're talking about, as you kept going?
I mean, we've tried different prototypes, and we've tried even a 20% Chardonnay Marc, and we decided that 15% was the best tasting one. Even though it worked at 20%, we went back, to 15% because that was the optimal for the taste. In my experience, when you develop chocolate, the further you move away from what is a typical chocolate that consumers are used to, the more risk you take that it's not going to taste great. And, taste is king. That's the biggest concern. It has to taste good. It doesn't matter what claims you can make on the chocolate if it doesn't taste good. So, but there weren't any, there were a few challenges working with the product because of the seeds in it. It is a bit more difficult to refine on lab equipment, not in the factory where we have, equipment that is capable of handling this kind of material. But no, it was a really, for me, it's a happy story. It's not always a happy story when you develop chocolate with new ingredients. Sometimes it's not that great. But to me, it was, a happy story.
Sure. Thank you so much. Russ, in your world, we've got a couple of ways to think about this. And similar to Valerie, when you first were starting to work with the material, what sort of surprised you about it? And, importantly, I think, from your perspective, when you're looking for new materials, what characteristics do you look for where you can sort of predict maybe success?
Yeah, when we were first introduced to the material, we were very surprised that basically every box was already checked. Usually we get introduced to a new material from a random source, and it's got a lot of work to do, but Scott and his team have been at this a long time, and they've got it ready to go and teed up to go B2B, which is our world. We sell to brands and factories and companies like Valerie's that are putting it into products. And when we're looking to launch a new product, we're basically looking for 5 boxes to be checked before we go. In this marketplace, natural products, first thing we're looking for is clean label. We're not going to launch anything that's not clean label. Clean label covers all the certifications we've looked at. Clean label means, of course, 100% natural. You want it to be environmentally friendly harvested, solvent-free. You want it to have as few pesticides as possible, everything else. So it checks every clean label box, and you can get it certified with as many certifications as possible. It starts with the basic kosher and halal certifications, but then you keep going into the grain-free certifications, vegan certifications, NSF, Informed Sport, FODMAP friendly. Basically, as many certifications as you can get is going to get you further down the road. And WellVine's already checked that box. They're there and teed up to do a lot more. Second thing we look for, it's got to have a great marketing story that's going to resonate with consumers. We could have the best ingredient in the world, but if consumers can't share stories about it with their friends and be proud to be consuming the product, they're not going to, the ingredient's not going to be successful as it should be otherwise. It can be a sea cucumber harvested off the coast of Okinawa in pristine waters, or mushrooms grown in the shade of the Himalayas or something, but it's got to have a good marketing story, and WellVine's got that. There's nothing better that resonates with people than the story of coastal Chardonnay and Napa and everything else, so they've checked that box. The third thing you're looking for, in an ingredient, it's got to have something that makes it efficacious, some sort of phytonutrient that you can hang your hat on to show the benefits of the ingredient. And we've spent the last hour looking at all those, whether it's the catechins or the flavonoids or the polyphenols. WellVine's well positioned in that space and has many phytonutrients that can hang on from the oligosaccharides and many more to be tapped into. So they check that box. Fourth box you're looking to check is basically your own science behind those phytonutrients. And with the UC Davis group, they've done a lot of the science already, so that box is checked. The more science you have on your own ingredient, the more successful it's going to be, the better price point you can charge. So you can charge a premium for products that have their own science rather than just piggybacking on someone else's science. And then the fifth thing you have to do for success is to have your supply chain extremely buttoned up. The supply chain covers everything from the agriculture side into the processing. And it doesn't end there, because once you've got it processed, you've got to have all your regulatory documentation together, regulatory quality testing. Everything has to be buttoned up, and then you have to distribute it properly and warehouse it properly and all of that. So WellVine is teed up, ready to go, and has checked all these boxes. And then from there, once you've dialed in your marketing message, you've got the price point right, you're on the path to success. And then once people start trying your product and the word gets out, it just snowballs and you have a successful ingredient in the marketplace.
Fantastic. Thank you, Russ. Given that we're talking now about, so we've got an ingredient that Valerie was able to work with and create a better tasting chocolate. We're ticking all the boxes for further development. We have a chef here who is working with the material and can bring a perspective that all of us like to try at home, but we know we're not really trained professionals. But when you think about the ingredient, chef, why do you think other chefs would be interested in it, and what excites you about working with it, and where do you see the potential for other ranges of creation for the material.
All right. Excuse me. Well, first off, chefs don't have time to think. Not that we don't think. I overthink everything. Maybe it's neurodivergence. Maybe it's whatever it is. But we want function. We want ease of use in a kitchen. A few things that we saw during the pandemic, as in the food service in general, was traceability of foods. Like, where does it come from? Our supply chains were shot. One of the things that excites me, and I know I've spoke to some of my colleagues and people in the industry, is, here's a great food source item that has excellent provenance. Wine country. Who doesn't think of wine country when they think of food? And now we can think of really, truly healthful. Traceability of supply chains. As you saw up there, everything is easy to find and where it comes from. So we want to create. We want to experience. We want the food to be, sensual and exciting and visually pleasurable. And when working with this product, we'll talk about a little later, the range of products I use it in, it's to, borrow a term from, my last presentation I just listened to, it's an easy hack. Here's a way to cut bitterness without adding extra fat or salt to dishes. There's no perceptible effects on the food. I know as a chef, when I create something and then I try to change it and make it more functional, the kiss of death to me is if I changed or altered the texture or the perceived mouthfeel or added a taste component in there. I don't want to alter the aromatics of it and the overall flavors. And, this didn't do it. This is so super exciting. It gives chefs something to talk about. It gives maybe even an added premium to a dish. Like, we're always trying to figure out how to make this dish more valuable to a customer. And with such a simple add-in, some of you have tasted this product, some of you have no idea how easy it is, but it truly can just be measured out, added in, and I had not needed to adjust any of my formulations, which if you want excitement, that excites me beyond belief. I took it into my kitchen with a healthy dose of skepticism. Why wouldn't I? I'm skeptical of everything, even the weather. What did it do to my tomatoes? Did it change my acid? Did it change my sugar levels? So when I kept playing with this, I discovered dozens of applications. I kept delving deeper, and I found that it really just improved the performance and the flavor of a lot of the foods that I worked with. And so many times we hear that we have to eat something. And I think if there was anything that excites me most about this, now this is something I want to eat, right? And it's an easy way for dietitians or people to get their clients excited about food. It's no longer, oh, you have to do this, you should do this. When they taste it, the flavor differences and the lack of, perceptible textural differences, you're going to want to eat it. And it just, that's exciting. To have a chef make a dish where the customer wants to eat it, the proof is in the pudding right there. So
Terrific. And that's a great segue. Aaron, we just heard from you about the diversity of foods that you're encouraging and sort of all the ways that different foods provide benefits. When you think about WellVine and Vine to Bar for your patient population, how do you think about where it fits and how you would recommend it?
Absolutely. So, like Chef was just talking about, it's unique to find what we could consider a supplement to the diet. So this is a unique supplement in that it's whole food derived, but it is still a supplement that we're adding onto these whole foods in front of us. Typically that's going to be in a capsule, like a typical supplement, or hidden, right? We hide it deep in a smoothie. We hide the collagen in the coffee. You hide things because they don't offer flavor or value beyond the health benefit. But with WellVine, and we see it in Vine to Bar, where again it added more value to the chocolate itself, added flavor with what the chef was talking about, like having a supplement that my patients not only could say, okay, I'm going to eat my bar of chocolate every day, which is a beautiful recommendation, but also I can cook with this. I can replace maybe the sugar I add to my pasta sauce with this. Maybe it adds some value in terms of that flavor profile and cuts the acidity. I'm not a chef, but if we can add things to different recipes that we're making and getting that benefit, it feels a lot less like a medication they're taking, like the capsule that they're taking as a supplement, and feels more like a true whole food source. And there's a lot of value to that to patients. Particularly in my population, we mentioned irritable bowel syndrome a bit. If you're not familiar with it, irritable bowel syndrome and functional dyspepsia kind of go together alongside the GI tract. But these aren't inflammatory conditions like you see with Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. Those conditions, there's a clear inflammatory marker. There's inflammation that's happening. It's treated a specific way. The medications can be highly effective, and people go into remission. For irritable bowel syndrome and functional dyspepsia, we don't have strong treatments. The medications are not actually that efficacious. Don't tell anyone I said that to come after me, but they're not that great if you look at the data, and they don't always improve all symptoms that people are experiencing or even longer outcomes. There's no such thing really as remission of IBS. What we do know with more research in IBS that what people are presenting with is a dysbiotic gut profile. So we know, okay, there's more of these maybe pathogenic bacteria present, or just less diversity, fewer of these good bacteria present. And we know that in some, especially our post-infectious IBS population, which is a large majority, there is increased intestinal permeability. And so whenever I'm thinking about, again, utilizing food and seeing a product come on the market that has not just a fiber source, like I love the idea of combos, but it has these polyphenols that might be able to improve that makeup of bacteria, that may help with that intestinal permeability, healing, and recovery, which hopefully we can prove in the future. That is extremely valuable to them because they know not only am I eating something, not only does it taste good, not only is it a food source I can be excited about, but this actually might be really improving what's driving my symptoms and what I'm experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And it's very exciting when you've been told there's nothing we can do over and over again, or the medications you're offered really don't have a lot of great efficacy. So.
Terrific. Thank you, Erin. We've been talking about it as both a food and as a dietary supplement. Russ, when you're looking for new ingredients, how do you discriminate between the food and supplement applications, and where do you how do you make that discrimination and see potential?
Yeah, we've got two divisions in our company. We've got a food division and a nutraceutical division. And all of our customers in the food world, they're dying to make claims and have functional products like they have in the nutraceutical world. And everyone over here in the nutraceutical world is dying and craving the volumes and the revenues of the food world. So in the middle, you have functional foods, and that's where most of these therapeutic ingredients are headed. And WellVine falls into that functional food path where it can benefit as a nutraceutical for different applications and more health-specific benefits. And then it functions well as a food, as we've heard from the team here. And it's right there in the middle, functional food. And it's basically food to make us all healthier and better, and it's perfectly positioned between both.
Terrific. Well, let's jump back to Chef then, because let's talk about some of those specific applications. We've had speculation on a few fronts about, well, what would you do with it, and how would you take it? I like Erin just talked about putting it in sauce. I actually happen to make. I'm not a very good chef, but I like to play one on TV sometimes, and I actually made a mole with it the other day, which I thought was really interesting. It gave a lot to it, and I like to make smoothies with the powder, but that is literally scratching the surface. Chef, what are you doing with it, and what do you see as some of those potential applications?
I mean, the easy way out is to say savory, sweet, and functional sports nutrition. I mean, that pretty much covers everything. But I sought performance possibilities, and I confirmed applications. I was fortunate enough about, 2 months ago, I think we're in New York City. Ed, Scott, Ralph, and myself got to sit down in, the Hell's Kitchen area of New York City, and I brought down a bunch of items, and I brought down control groups versus, ones with the add-in of 4.5 to 7 grams of this WellVine powder, and I confirmed its taste and I guess, probably increased performance, for lack of a better word, in items such as lemon vinaigrettes, barbecue sauces, tomato sauces, spiced nuts, a rhubarb compote, all items that are traditionally registered as bitter on the tongue. Fruit leather, in which, you could make a functional fruit leather for kids. I know when I had my two kids growing up through school, I used to make fruit leather for them all the time and put it in their lunch boxes. I've made an upgraded chocolate truffle using the Barry Callebaut chocolate with the addition of vitamin B3 in it, and there was no perceptible, I think it tasted better. And I came across some mistakes. I made a a nut coating. I usually do like a spiced nut for salads or for hors d'oeuvres or anything, and I thought, well, I don't necessarily like the way this tastes, but then I took it back to my confectionery lab and I threw it in my panning machine and just kept throwing charges of chocolate over it. I wish I could have shown that to Ralph, because, you want to talk about panning, just look at M&Ms. And I just made it even better. It's just, so it may not be on the finished product. It could be something underneath the finished product. And like I said, it's easily hidden, and it just makes everything taste better. So I think the range will keep growing. If you all want to send me more kilograms of the product, I will keep giving you larger range. But no, I really enjoy playing with it, and I think it's on the way. I think most of my cooking, as you might have heard from my brief bio, is I spent many years in the Mediterranean. My father, shipped me off when I was 15 to Italy because he thought I needed to learn a work ethic. And sadly, I've been type A and haven't stopped working since, so I need to find some downtime. I lived in the Caribbean for years, and I found that it works in all kinds of cuisines. And I'm very well versed in French, Italian, Spanish, Caribbean. I lived in Singapore for a little while, so I know a little bit about, true Chinese cooking and some Malay styles and Thai. And I see it being able to be utilized in about every single cuisine that I have touched. So I even beverages like you mentioned, smoothies, I don't think that we have found the ceiling yet. So that goes also back to what really excites me.
Awesome, thank you. And so Valerie, with that in mind too, I know your focus with Barry Callebaut and innovation and created for us this chocolate. There are other applications of the chocolate within the world of flavors and ingredients. What categories and spaces do you see as truly interesting potential for both the Marc and for this now combination of Acticoa with WellVine?
Well, there's a chocolate chips for bakery, like at home baking, where you're making cookies and muffins. I think it would be great. Bakery application in general. I've seen upcycling of material for like making muffins, not just chocolate. For the chocolate also, so we've created a chocolate that you can eat like as is. But there's also like all the nutrition bars out there. These companies don't always have equipment to crystallize chocolate properly. And they will typically use what we call a chocolate compound, which is just like a chocolate, but it's made with vegetable fat other than cocoa butter. So I think that this could be a really great application, is just making like a confectionery coating with this superfood and Acticoa for like nutrition bars. I think that would be, a great combination, and it would just boost polyphenol. It's upcycling, it's plant-based, rich in fiber. So I think it would work really well with like nutrition bars and product like that.
Terrific. We're going to ask a question, I think, for each of you at this point too. And then I want to open up the floor for questions for the panel. I know you're saving some questions from the other presentations, but with this very unique panel, we'd like to entertain some questions for them from the audience. But before we do that, when you think about just the trifecta, here we've got this extraordinary idea of taste, sustainability, and health. Just for each of you, how does that affect your thinking about the ingredient overall, and in thinking about those applications that we've talked about? Let's start with Russ.
Yeah, from the trifecta, we love the sustainability story first because that's how we're going to base that as the ingredient cell. Sustainability goes a long ways. The upcycle story is great. We can get certifications tied to that. But then the health benefits, that's where you're going to make your hay on the nutraceutical side for sure, and then probably on the food side as well. Again, get your active component that's going to be identified in your certificates of analysis that you can hang your hat on and test it out every time, and then tie your studies into that. And we know it's healthy. If you got a certificate of analysis to back it up that's consistent every batch, you're going to have customers that are going to use it and use it for the rest of their lives probably. So we're teed up.
Great. Valerie?
One of the things that I like about Chardonnay Marc is that it's only one ingredient having all these qualities. You know, when you make chocolate, you want to try to keep the formulation simple. It's easier for the factories also. So having one ingredient with all these attributes, you know, the upcycling, the story about upcycling, the polyphenols, plant-based, again, really important. It's one of the biggest trends out there is positioning product as plant-based and all these fibers. So I don't have to use like 4 different ingredients to obtain what I'm looking for. I just need one ingredient in the formulation. So I think it's great.
Thank you. Erin?
A great follow to that, but definitely on the health side is my favorite side of the trifecta. But thinking about the potential use in other conditions, as we have kind of alluded to or talked about in practice, I just see a lot of gaps in being able to leverage true nutrition in a simple way, because again, that rainbow is hard to get to for some people, for autoimmune disease, for metabolic disorders, for GI, just for that range of conditions. I think there's a lot of interesting application, and even if we don't have the exact answers of can this treat this autoimmune disease, like we probably will never have that. Maybe we will. It's very hard to study in those populations, but what we can do is know that we're adding something in a simple way that's safe and can be supportive. And for me as a dietitian, that is what I have to work with from an evidence-based perspective, is how can I utilize something simple, safe, and effective to support the person in front of me. And maybe that means we reduce the risk. Maybe that means they heal faster. Maybe that means less medications. That would be incredible. But at the end of the day, we know we're at least using something that we can trust and, again, truly leverage.
Awesome. Thank you. Chef?
All right. I'll try to keep this brief. But as a modern day chef, I have to wear many hats, or I guess maybe in my kitchen toques, so to speak. So I'm always trying to juggle cost, function, taste, environmental concerns. So, you know, all of that is sustainable. Yes, you can't just think of the product. Yeah, it's really nice and sustainable that we're keeping this out of a landfill or we're keeping it out of composting, but sustainability also encompasses, you know, environmental factors, cost, health benefits to the population. So my purchasing decision has to be based on that, and I want to believe in it. I want my customers to be able to believe in it as well and know that I can just put it in most applications, have a supercharged product and, you know, a long life cycle on it. Selfishly, from a health benefit perspective, I love that I can put it in a sports bar or on a race day nutrition. Maybe for some of you who are formulators out there have products, you know, 15% mass replacement that not only improves taste but adds healthy fibers without gastrointestinal distress, which, let me tell you, is never good on race day. You know, and as a chef or a relentless triathlete, I'm a confectioner as well. You know, I take this trifecta and I'd love to, you know, partner up with people and come up with indulgent sports nutrition. I cannot tell you how much, for those of you who have no idea what kind of garbage is out there on the shelves from these goos and all these replacements, it's absolutely horrifying. Or recovery treats. You know, I call it nutritional decadence or functional decadence. I can't think about how cool it would be the next time I'm grinding away in a 140.6 mile race to be able to reach into my little bento box and pull out a truffle that's not only going to regulate my blood sugar on the race, but it's going to provide me with mental comfort. I mean, a lot of why we eat is for comfort. And if you don't produce something that's comforting to people, well, there goes your sustainability. You're not going to stay in business for much longer. I also know it's good environmentally through the upcycling. You know, I formulated truffle. Some of you may have tried them today. Meltaways, panned items, bars, all kinds of items that I know will have a health benefit lasting for people that will actually be enjoyable to taste. I mean, so many, like I said, I cannot go over again how many products out there are terrible, taste and bloating and everything else. So, you know, for me, the sustainability it's great with the environmental factors, but to be able to keep a product on the shelves for longer that people are excited to eat and not feel like they have to eat, that's the most exciting, you know, part of the trifecta for me right there.
Fantastic. My mind's just going on where we can go, and it's super exciting listening to all four of you. So thank you for that. And what I'd like to do now is just open it up to some questions for this panel, for anybody who has one.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you on the panel. Wonderful learning experience here. I'm just curious about heat stability, upper range, as well as has anyone, maybe more to the chef, has anyone tried this in a pizza dough?
I can't speak to what would happen to the health benefits through heat stability, but I know through heat stability it did not change the perceptible textures. And what I mean by that is if I made a raw item I made a lemon vinaigrette and put it in, which was room temperature, it was just as smooth as when I cooked it. I know sometimes when I cook some functional items they can clump up or get gritty or anything, but no perceptible textural differences when it was cooked.
Yeah, some phytonutrients can be damaged by heat, so to really know for sure, you'd have to test before and after. So, yeah, depends on the matrix that it's in, and I imagine there will be some degradation, but should be some therapeutic benefits left over for sure.
Hi, Danielle with NutriIngredients USA. I know you talked a little bit about further product development, but I'm just curious, is there any plans for this to be encapsulated or perhaps put in a gummy?
Sounds like a terrific idea. Yes. We're going to get our director of innovation on it immediately.
Hey, Ed. I have a question from Becky Epstein, and her question is, how do they deal with the heavy metals in the chocolate and cocoa?
You mean like heavy metals in chocolate in general? Because we have guidelines and maximum. So we choose the cocoa beans that don't have like cadmium, for example, or lead into our chocolate because of Prop 65. So all our chocolate, that's how we deal with it. It's basically choosing the right cocoa beans that we know have lower content for heavy metal.
Justin Siegel with UC Davis, so I'm going to ask a science question. But I know not asking you about the science itself, actually, because I think you're the right group to think about what science to do. And it'd be great, actually, to hear from each of you. We saw a lot of great studies today about all the benefits, and I think as was mentioned first, you got to own your own science. So it'd be interesting, just from your perspective, from the studies you saw today, what would you like to see next? Like, what would be that next study that you're like, wow, if they showed that, this is a no-brainer?
I think if we're pulling from FODMAP research and like the diet, world, there's some newer research looking at like FODMAPs and mast cell activation, and mast cells or immune cells in the gut are a really big area of interest for irritable bowel syndrome, mast cell activation syndrome, maybe those connections to like Ehlers-Danlos and POTS and kind of that complicated world that's emerging. So it'd be interesting to see, I don't know how you would do this, again, I'm not a scientist, but seeing how possibly these polyphenols impact those mast cells or even eosinophils, and kind of just looking deeper at that immune connection would be fascinating, and maybe in 10 years be the big thing that everyone cares about.
From my perspective, everyone loves gummies. Everyone loves low dose gummies. You can only fit about 200 milligrams practically into a gummy, preferably 150. So ideally, I'd like to see a lower dose study so you can just have a small, 3-4 gummies, 6 to 800 milligrams to see some of the therapeutic benefits at a slightly lower dose.
I'm really interested in the type of claims that we can make. It's, what more can we discover about the product and what future claims we can do, because, this is how you sell a product, is how can you position it on the market, what claims can you do. I think that's what I'm more interested in the future. What more can we say about it and what can we claim about it?
I like what I've seen. I'm just going to be honest. It performed well for me. I would like to take it back into my kitchen for more testing and try to break it, so to speak. I always love to find the upper limits of any product I work with. I haven't found them yet, but I'm more than willing to keep trying and then come back to the team and say, this didn't work in this application. How can we make it better? Or how can you concentrate it into a smaller form so I can get into a smaller batch and still have the same results? But I hope that helps.
I'd like to can I ask a question? Going back to, and this is for Valerie and for Chef Girard, from Ralph's presentation, that really deep, intense flavor chemistry research that, from John Manofo's lab and that Ralph was talking about, is that really familiar territory for you guys, or is that a new sort of depth of level with an ingredient that you've seen? I'm just curious about your reaction and how you work with that.
We do similar research, we've analyzed cocoa, just to analyze every component that there is in cocoa. So I am familiar with it, but what I found really interesting also is that it was done on the separate element in the Chardonnay Marc. The seeds, the pulp, and the question that I would have for Ralph is, you have the aroma profile for each component, but I'm interested in what's the aroma profile for the Chardonnay Marc, and does it fit with each component? Mm-hmm. Does it make sense? Is there any kind of synergy in it? But we've done at Barry Callebaut similar studies on cocoa, identified every molecules in it. But yeah, it would be interesting also to look at it for the final chocolate, and not just component, but Chardonnay Marc. And once you have it in chocolate, what does it look like? And I'm really interested in the synergy of all these ingredients combined together.
All right, I think I understand this question. When I try to teach flavor, for my students back in New York at the culinary school, taste plus flavor equals aroma. And the usual example I use is a cup of coffee. And I say, what's the taste? And some of them understand, and they'll say bitter, and then the aroma, and they'll say coffee. And, I say, well, that's my flavor of coffee. But if you delve deeper into the coffee, you have different, aromatic notes. You could get burnt, you could get toast, you could get fruit, you could get tar, you could get ground, you could whatever, vanilla, bourbon, so many compounds in there. And I think as I would apply Ralph's presentation to the chocolate is, chocolate has so many aromatic compounds, and when people smell it or they taste it or they eat it, they get multiple notes. Some people don't. I hate to say someone who's simple, but sometimes simplicity is elegance. They may eat it and just get chocolate. right? They're not getting that there's hints of vanilla, or they're not getting that there's hints of toast, depending on how, dark the beans were roasted. And this ingredient doesn't change that. So I think from a taste plus flavor aroma, taste plus aroma equals flavor, I don't think that the average person would even notice this is there, which I think is a good thing, because there are tasters, there are super tasters, there are people who are looking for perceptible differences, but I think this reigns supreme, and it doesn't affect what I would say 90% of the population would be able to detect. And that's who I would want to sell to.
If I can just quickly add also, I've worked on a project where we analyze a chocolate and its degradation through time. We did sensory evaluation with, super panelists, basically trained panelists. And we always confirmed that the data that we got from the panel via gas chromatography. And at one point we realized that our sensory analyst or panelist in the sensory test that we did were as good as doing after gas chromatography, and we realized it wasn't even necessary. The panelists were trained, and they were well trained, and they could figure out, what it tasted like, to the point where I was told you don't have to send samples all the time to have it tested in the lab. Just the sensory panel was enough to detect, off flavors, for example. We were trained well enough to detect it. And it wasn't even necessary to do all these analyses in the lab.
I have another virtual question. This is from Melania. Can you discuss any future developments or plans for the product and its applications?
So right now, from an innovation standpoint with the WellVine team, there's a few things in formal development. Creation of a concentration of nuts with the chocolate. We've seen already our chocolate-covered almonds are extremely popular. They're extremely tasty. We think there's more opportunities with different varieties of nuts and to do different types of clustering with the chocolate and nuts. So that's an area that we're exploring. Some of the panelists have already talked about nutrition bars. We think that's a category that is ripe for development. There's a lot of usage of language in marketing, honestly, that sort of tells a story that maybe isn't as true as some of the panelists have identified, where the Chardonnay Marc could be used in place of some other things that provide a natural sweetness or could reduce the sugar content of things that were. So we're looking at that space with bars. And then from truly exploratory, shelf-stable beverages, there's applications. We've talked with Valerie and Cal, but we think ice cream is an adjacent category where a chocolate-flavored ice cream with our product could be really fascinating. So there's a lot of things in development. Probably the next thing you'll see Scott alluded to, which is just the WellVine Chardonnay Marc with the cacao that we've talked about. That's probably the first innovation that will come next. That will be provide the opportunity for claim base. And as I've said, I'm already experimenting with that myself. I know Chef has as well. But they make phenomenal smoothies. My personal favorite: almond milk, a banana, our ingredient, and a protein like a peanut powder. So you've got all plant-based, highly nutritious, low calorie, and from an absorption standpoint, everything works really beautifully. So there's a lot of application, but that's kind of the broad general direction at the moment.
And the Vine to Bar controlled brand strategy is one we recommend and very potentially very successful. The Vine to Bar drives the awareness of the WellVine. People love that brand, and then other brands want to launch. So it's a very good strategy to have a controlled brand that you're controlling the message and getting the word out on the street, and then other brands see that and they want to add the ingredient as well. So good strategy coming together nicely.
Okay, I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Harold for those closing questions.
Growing hops in Michigan, they used to be growing there quite a bit, but we brought them back, and it was really interesting. I've heard a lot of talk about the coastal Chardonnay, and a lot of the varieties that we brought back from out west perform very differently in the terroir in Michigan. Actually brought out a lot of notes that weren't there in the West, and we've actually created some different. They're the same variety, but it's totally different flavor for brewing beer and stuff. And I'm wondering, you guys, I heard some discussion about maybe the coastal Chardonnay is going to have a different profile, or this might be different than the Chardonnays grapes that you guys might be bringing in from other areas. So I didn't know if there was any discussion on that or.
Great question. Scott, do you want to address that?
I'll talk about it a little generally. We actually have Dr. Tori Arvik, who is Director of Applied Research. Is that what you are? For JFW. And he knows way more about this than I do. So if we need to, we can have him come up here. But one of the things that we know about coastal Chardonnay, and there's actually a paper that confirmed this. So, Valerie was talking about the value of human evaluation of flavor and taste and everything. And we've known for a long time that coastal Chardonnay was special, that there were things that you could do with those grapes that you couldn't do with grapes that were grown lower elevations, warmer climates, little less stress on the plant, etc. But what this paper essentially did is it took grapes that were grown in coastal regions where you have two things that seem to affect the quality of Chardonnay grapes more than anything else. One is nighttime temperature. So at night, you want those grapes to cool off. If the temperature remains high and the grapes continue to have that really high temperature all throughout that 24-hour period, you see a decrease in quality. And by a decrease in quality, we mean a decrease in aroma, taste, other things like that, color, etc. So the paper evaluated this using a scale, and they found that nighttime temperature was one of the biggest determinants of whether or not you got a high-quality grape. We know that coastal grown grapes, it cools off at night. Those of you who got up early this morning to join us here and came over, that beautiful fog that was there this morning, that's what we're talking about, right? That fog comes in, it cools things off, and it also waters the grapes. So you actually get, instead of having to irrigate and such, you actually get some hydration of the grape too. So that's one thing. And the other one, the other parameter that they looked at in this particular paper was called GDD, or growing degree days. And that's the number of days that reach a certain threshold on temperature where the grape is actually able to continue to develop and to move forward. What was interesting about this paper is that it said that higher numbers of growing degree days were also associated with lower quality. So if you have more growing degree days, again, the plant has less stress, doesn't have to work as hard, it develops fewer of these interesting flavor and aroma compounds. So what this means is that when you put it near the coast and you get those cool nights, combined with more moderate, instead of the larger the higher temperatures for a longer period of time, which increases the number of growing degree days, you actually have an increase in quality. The plant has to struggle a little bit at certain times. It gets to recover at night, and that's when it puts on these compounds that are associated with higher quality. So what we all knew intuitively, and what Barbara and Jess have been saying for years about the superiority of these things subjectively has now been proven objectively in science and through published research. Tori, did you want to add anything to that?
All the research you saw today was not done on generic Chardonnay. It was all done on WellVine trademark Chardonnay. That was Chardonnay harvested from these specific vineyards with these high qualities, processed in a proprietary way to preserve all of the benefits. So when you read the papers, it will very clearly say this is an assessment of Chardonnay, WellVine trademark Chardonnay attributes. So
that's a great point, Jeff. Thanks. And Russ, you actually talked about this. This is one of your criteria, right? Science done on your product, not borrowed science, not science that's been done on someone else's and applied to yours generically, but original science done on the very thing that you are selling. That's what we're talking about. That's the point here. All of the research that we've been done has been done on coastal Chardonnay that was grown and sourced from our partner Jackson Family Wines, right, who really dominates that sourcing capability. So it is a unique material. It's a material that's been verified several times to have, properties that you don't get from others.
Thank you. Eric Hamburg here from PIPA. Thanks to all the speakers. Super informative. Love the session. That's my comment. And then maybe the question is, and I don't know if Ralph can hear this, but maybe others can answer, but you guys did a really nice job talking about the various different ways in which you process it. When you harvest it, then you freeze it, and I think I heard you dry it, and then you grind it. And I don't know if the companies looked at different ways to process that material that might either preserve some of those polyphenols or even maybe enhance them. And if there's ways that you could concentrate that to use it in different, that material in different products, could be interesting.
So one of the things that I'm not sure, I had a couple of people actually, Timothy and others mentioned to me, they thought one of the most interesting things that Ralph said is we've got all these levers in our manufacturing that we can use to tweak and really kind of tune the product in different ways. So one of the ways you could tune that is with taste and aroma. We've already done a little bit of that work, actually. I don't know how many different drying systems we've looked at, how many different milling systems we've looked at. Over the last dozen years or so, believe me, we tried just about everything you can think of. And what we do know is that you can actually alter that somewhat. You can actually provide more caramelized notes, for example, by increasing the temperature at certain points in the drying process, right? So you get this caramelization that occurs. We know that it also makes a difference how quickly you process the material. So one of the keys to the way we do it is we take it out of that wine press and we stabilize it immediately so that we don't get degradation of the material. We know that particle size has a lot to do with it. Particle size not only affects texture, but it also affects, interestingly, bioavailability. So we actually see an ability of the body to extract some of those important biochemical or phytochemicals depending on how the material is ground and how it's processed there. So there's a lot of different levers that we can work with. And being able to break it down in the way that we have, I think we can confidently say we know more about really the chemistry of the Chardonnay grape. I'm not talking about the wine, I'm talking about Chardonnay grape, than pretty much any group on the planet, right? So now we have all this wonderful information in there. We understand what all of those components are. And as we start getting more and more correlation with the benefits that those components provide, whether they're sensory or experiential benefits or whether they're health benefits, we can start to make those fine tweaks. And with PIPA's partnership, potentially we have the ability also to apply AI to that to understand how all of those things might change over time and change with different parameters. So it's really exciting, we think. We think that there's a lot to be done there and that the possibilities are endless. I will say of a lot of the ideas that came out today, though, Valerie, I really like your coding idea. That's my next big thing. I think that's a great idea, and I'm going to be all over that. So thank you very much.
Very cool. Surprising trifecta feels like a $1 billion ingredient in the making here. This is pretty cool.
So I'm going to exercise chair privilege here, unless, Ed, you want to say something.
No.
No? All right.
No, the only thing keeping us between wine and chocolate is you.
Me. All right. Yeah, I knew you wanted to say something. So I am gonna. So sorry, I'm gonna say a few things. So drag it out just a few minutes. But number one is I did want to recognize Mike Danielson. Mike, you can raise your hand, hopefully. Mike, actually, there's always in terms of network theory and that sort of thing, there's always these, sort of quiet people behind the scenes, but everybody knows that person, and Mike is that person for this room, and so really appreciate everything you've done to help us out in that regard. Thank you very much for that. And then a few things. So this is my, sort of I don't know, reflection stuff from 30 years of being in the industry. So I've had a really extraordinary opportunity from actually 30 years in the food industry, much of those as a chief science officer for one of the world's largest food companies. And then I also had 5 years prior to that getting my graduate degrees in research. And so just want to say that I've seen a lot over that time, and I want to hammer home a few things, because I've seen a lot, and I've also seen a lot of people miss sort of what's happening. And thanks to Mike and a few others, you guys are, it's a real privilege to be in this room, because I can tell you it's a privilege for me to be in this room, and there's a few reasons for that. So number one is I had a chance over a few decades to actually help to lead and create a paradigm shift, which is an overused term, but when it happens, it's a really rare and special thing. And so the paradigm shift was actually that chocolate could be healthy, and so the cocoa flavonols piece and what Dr. Holt talked about. In getting to that point, we actually fought complexity. So we utilized the time-worn path of taking something that was really complex, which Valerie knows as well as anyone, except for Ralph. Ralph knows more about that complexity, as I mentioned. But, that cocoa is really complex, and we fought that complexity, and utilizing a reductionist approach, which now seems very 20th century, since we're in the 21st century, we figured out exactly, what molecule was, largely responsible for a certain effect. And what you guys have been witness to today is what I like to feel is going to be the 21st century approach to food science and food and health. And that is not fighting complexity, but actually creating paradigm shifts by embracing complexity. And Scott actually, as I've worked with these guys over the last few years, it was a few years ago that Scott he kept saying it and drumming it in, but it's really true. It's like the beauty of what's happening with the Chardonnay WellVine Marc is we're embracing the complexity, and we're thinking about this from a whole food perspective. And I do a lot of work with a lot of people around the world, and it takes me to some interesting places. And during the last year, my standard talk, if you will, is about how food science is a 20th century science, and we need to create a food science revolution that is about, becoming a 21st century science. And it's this embracing the complexity that is actually going to get us there. And you guys, should feel privileged. I feel privileged. But what you saw today was a world-class representation of embracing that complexity in terms of the natural products chemistry, and not just being satisfied with studying only health or only the sensory and flavor part, but actually the combination of those things. This is a rare event. My colleague Justin Siegel from UC Davis can definitely tell you this. We run around universities and you go lab to lab to lab, and it's a siloed out thing. What you saw today was not a silo. What you saw today was a community, and it's a world-class community that's actually introducing a new model and a new way, of approaching food and health. And it was really cool, again, to see that Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry recognize that. The other thing I want to say is that I've had the privilege over the last 35 years or so of seeing some great innovators. And there's a characteristic of great innovators, which is they see what everybody else sees in terms of observation, but they see something different. And so I mentioned that I'm really, grateful and pleased that Barbara and Peggy hosted this event today, and that's, it's really awesome. It's a great event, and really appreciate that. But actually, they saw something. They saw what everybody else saw 12 years ago, or whatever it was, Peggy, you can cite the day. But they saw something that nobody else was seeing. And what they saw is what we're seeing now today. And from a science perspective, the complexity we're embracing. So, it's really cool to be in the presence of genuine innovators. And these ladies are that. And it's great to be involved in this program in that regard.